welcome to another episode of Drafters TV presented by Drafters Fantasy Sports. My name is Ben Hauver. I am the host of this show. If you're unaware, Drafters is the premier site for best ball drafting. You can download the app for free on iOS or Android, where you will find best ball drafts for as low as $1.11 all the way up to the 109s for the big ballers out there. New leagues are starting all the time, so get in there and get drafting. On today's show, I'm going to be joined once again by Peter Overzet to discuss the most important position in best ball, running back, how my rankings differ from Drafters ADP, and ultimately how we can help our audience get in sort of a better grasp of how to attack these drafts. So this is part 2 of a 4-part series. We're going to have individual episodes for each of the 4 draftable positions. The quarterback video is already available and the rest will be coming soon, so make sure you mash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Don't miss out on a single piece of this content. Now, without any further ado, let's welcome to the show once again, Peter Overzet. Peter, how you doing?
Doing good, Ben. Excited to talk about running backs. I'm a bit of a notorious running back hater. I subscribe to the Church of Zero RB, so it'll be interesting to try to get me to plant flags on some of these running backs who I just conceptually do not like.
I am very excited to get into that talk. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of these rankings and ADP, we're going to start off with 5 quick questions, just like we did in the quarterback show. Are you ready?
Yes, let's do it.
All right, question number 1. Is there a set number of running backs that you would like to leave a best ball draft with, in an ideal scenario?
Yeah, I think I'm a little more fluid and flexible with the exact amount of running backs. I was pulling up the draft I did with some industry guys on Drafters a couple weeks ago. It looks like I took 5 running backs. I think you can justify anywhere from 5 to 7 running backs depending on where you are drafting them. In this particular draft, I used a round 1 pick on a running back, so I felt like I could go a little skinnier at the position with 5, but I could also see myself, if I went true zero RB, trying to load up on a few more at the back half of the draft.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you there. I think that it's really dependent on how early you take running backs, how many you load up with in basically the first 5 rounds. If you get 2 or 3 guys in those first 5 to 6 rounds, then I don't think you need to be taking 6 or 7 guys. But, if you go true full zero RB, then I think that you're going to want to get exposure to more guys there. Question 2 here. Now, look, this question is not meant to hurt anybody's feelings. I hope it doesn't, but let's be real. If we're playing a word association game and someone says DFS tout, the first word that comes to your mind isn't going to be impressive physical specimen. You're not going to be thinking about someone who spent a ton of time with spread offenses. You're going to be thinking about someone who spent a lot of time with spread sheets, if you catch my drift. So, as one of the few thought leaders in the DFS community who spent time with a real athletic human being, an NFL player, of course I'm talking about your storied history with Dolphin star runner Patrick Laird, do you feel like that experience has given you a deeper perspective on the game compared to some of those who simply watch from afar?
I don't know if I have any deeper perspective on the game, although it has been fun to get to know Laird a little bit more as we go. And, Davis and I were messaging with him on draft night. It was actually really funny. We told him we were so stoked that the Dolphins had drafted Tua, and he was like, "Oh, you guys and my girlfriend just broke the news to me. I was getting out of the shower." So Patrick Laird is just so chill. He's not even, sweating who the Dolphins take with their, first overall pick. He's just like, "Oh yeah, that's cool." So no, and the thing is Patrick is so sharp that Patrick understands the replaceability of the running back position, right? I know a lot of these running backs who, granted, are more high pedigree running backs than him, have these egos and, want to be paid all this much money and stuff. But Laird actually understands the dynamics of the running back position, the longevity, why it doesn't make sense to overpay for them. So he's just a cool, smart guy. And I guess the only actual unintended consequence is I end up using a pick on him in basically every dynasty league, just as a talisman good luck charm. So yeah, he is eating up spots on my dynasty team. But all that said, I do think the draft for the Dolphins was about as good as it could have been for Laird, right? They don't invest in any rookie. They signed Jordan Howard in free agency, who doesn't really profile as a 3-down back. They use a 5th-round pick to acquire Breida, who again is a great running back, but has been one of the most fragile, players in the league. To me, this is like best case scenario for Laird. So I'm actually pretty excited for him, and I think he's going to get some work this year.
Question 3. Okay. People don't handcuff like they used to, It's sort of a dead and gone strategy, I think, and it doesn't necessarily make sense in best ball because generally you want every player on your roster to have the potential to make it into your starting lineup on any given week. If you pick Zeke Elliott in the first round, then you pull the trigger on Tony Pollard in the 11th, right? Okay, you've got your insurance on a potential Zeke injury, but one of your roster spots is essentially useless on a week-to-week basis. So, how do you feel about handcuffing running backs specifically in best ball?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of it. I mean, especially in bigger contests where you're trying to beat out hundreds or thousands of people, I think it makes no sense because you're trying to maximize the upside of every pick. Like you said, you're naturally capping or condensing your upside into just two picks into one, potential piece of upside. And when I think about it for redraft, why it can make sense, right, is often that format is you're trying to get to the playoffs, and then we all know anything can happen. So you're trying to raise your floor to get into the playoffs, but a lot of times with these best ball teams, there is no mini playoffs. You're just trying to get first or second cumulatively over the course of the season. And to do that, you need the most amount of upside, the most potential shots at doing that. So if I'm drafting, I'm looking at my best ball draft again that I did on Drafters recently, and I took Dalvin Cook in the first round, and I passed over Alexander Mattison to draft Tony Pollard because it's I don't want to just own the Vikings back. I want the chance to hit on the Vikings bell cow and the Cowboys bell cow in the event of a Zeke injury. So in best ball, I'm very rarely handcuffing unless it's just by far the best value on the board.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that point. Question 4. Look, Drafters is the premier app and website for best ball drafts. We all know this. And they don't include kickers, and more importantly, they don't include defenses as part of their best ball product. Would you consider that to be the definitive stake through the heart of those sick fish out there who still believe that defense matters?
So it goes both ways, right? Where my buddy Denny Carter, he loves his kickers. I know that based on some of the research done over at RotoViz that there is an edge both structurally and individual stuff with sometimes identifying kickers and defenses. But as far as a platform like Drafters where people just want to pop in, do a draft, have fun, draft skill position players, I think it's the best kind of, distillation of best ball drafting. So I prefer not having them. I can see the arguments of why people would like them, but when I do a quick draft on my phone or whatever on a Friday night, I don't want to be having to worry about kicker and defensive bye weeks and all that nonsense. I just want to draft the good stuff.
Yeah, yep, of course. And then finally, question 5. No group of players sees a bigger spike in ADP than rookie running backs do after the NFL draft. We'll talk about some of them specifically soon, but in general, I know that some people will only draft running backs in these super early February, March, and April best ball drafts before landing spots just shoot their price tag up to the moon. So, of course, their ADPs are skyrocketing, which means that some people are still taking these running backs after the draft once the landing spots are certain. Which side of the fence do you land on when it comes to rookie running backs?
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because rookie running backs are one of the best ways to really outproduce draft position based on ADP. But we do also see, like you said, after the draft, they're almost priced at their ceiling or their most optimistic outcome. So in general, I'm probably going to be fading the running backs in, rounds 2 through 6, and then maybe be a little more interested in the rookie running backs after that might be slightly undervalued. But, I'm seeing drafts where DeAndre Swift, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, but he's going round 3. And to me, that's just way too rich. Considering the situation and a lot of the unknowns. So it's a tricky calculus because I do think you want rookies, but you really have to pick your spots and make sure all the upside isn't priced out.
Yeah, that is a very good point. And, without any more dilly-dallying, let's get right into these rankings, all right? So we're going to start off with the top 9 running backs in order of my rankings. Christian McCaffrey 1, Saquon Barkley 2, Zeke Elliott 3, Alvin Kamara 4, Kenyon Drake 5, Miles Sanders 6, Derrick Henry 7, Dalvin Cook all the way down at 8, and then Austin Eckler at number 9. Compared to the quarterback show that we did a few days ago, there's a lot more differences in my rankings at running back compared to the ADP. So what really stands out to you in this group of 9?
Yeah, so we gotta get right to the elephant in the room. I think some people would be like, "Whoa, Kenyon Drake and Miles Sanders, that's high." I like the aggressiveness on those rankings. And the other thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but most people, just because you have these guys as your rankings, it doesn't necessarily mean that people need to reach from a specific slot to get them. There's certain pockets in the draft that might make it more advantageous than others. But anyways, I just went on a sidetrack. But the thing that jumps out is obviously your Dalvin Cook ranking. So I'm going to just throw it back to you. I think I would have him at 5 after Kamara. Why are you so down on Dalvin Cook, or why are you so high on Drake, Sanders, and Henry, who you have ahead of him?
All right, I will answer that in 2 parts. First off, what you said at the top, I think, is one of the most important concepts to understand in best ball, especially if you're drafting a lot of leagues. Look, if you're only going to be drafting one best ball league, then yeah, take your guy. Take Kenyon Drake at 5. Absolutely do not do that if you're going to be drafting, 30, 50, 100 or more best ball drafts, like I think a lot of people are. If I'm on the clock and I've got pick 10, Henry's ADP is 10.3, yeah, there's a very good chance I'm going to be taking Derrick Henry ahead of guys like Miles Sanders and Kenyon Drake, who I do like more than him, because the chances are that one or both of them are going to be available to me when they come back at round 15. So yeah, ADP and understanding how to use that is extremely important. So, if somebody is in a draft with me in Drafters and sees me take Henry ahead of one of these guys, I don't want to be getting DMs saying that, I'm just being false on this show. But it's very important, I think, to understand that concept. And just because you believe a guy is higher doesn't mean that you always need to take them at that point. Now,
I will say, Ben,
yeah,
you do want to get those DMs, because that means people are paying attention and they're engaging with your content, even if they miss the forest for the trees. You want those DMs.
Oh, yes. Send them over. Send them over by all means. But let's talk about the Dalvin Cook thing, because, yeah, I know that I'm extremely low on him as my RB8. He's the consensus RB5. A lot of the time you'll see him go ahead of Kamara as the RB4. And look, I'm not going to take anything away from what he did last year. He had an incredible year. He was extremely efficient, especially in the passing game, 3rd in yards per route run as a running back. But here's the thing. I think, first of all, the Vikings offense is going to be a little bit worse, if not a lot worse than they were last year, with the loss of Stephon Diggs, with Adam Thielen being another year older. Yes, I'm a big fan of Justin Jefferson, and I think he's going to be good, probably early in his career, but overall, we can't really expect him to replicate the production that Stephon Diggs had for that team. So I think that the scoring is likely to come down overall for the Vikings offense. Now, if that happens and this offense takes a step back, I think it's reasonable to assume that the touchdowns for Dalvin also go down. And let's face it, those touchdown numbers were probably going to be coming down regardless. He had 6 all-purpose touchdowns in the first 15 games of his career, and then last season he finishes with 13 touchdowns over a 14-game span. It's just not something that I want to do when I'm targeting a running back, is focus on somebody who's going to be getting so much of their production from touchdowns, which we know is one of the least sticky things year to year. You'll notice that Aaron Jones isn't on this list, and that's exactly why, because these guys that I think are really touchdown dependent are just not the guys that I want to be targeting. I'd rather go after guys like Sanders and Drake and Eckler on this list, who, they're going to be racking up the catches, and that's what I want to be targeting in these PPR leagues. So does that make sense to you, or am I just criminally underrating Cook?
No, again, these are, when you're talking about, all of these guys are going to go within a span of 8 or 9 picks anyway. So, we are splitting hairs. I think I do understand the argument about the offensive efficiency and, are those amount of touchdowns going to be available? But we also know, volume is the most important thing for running back production. And the reason that these guys go at the top of the draft is because we're almost drafting their role more than we are even their offense. And we have seen that Dalvin Cook does have that ability to be the 20-plus touch back. And I know that you're pointing out that he doesn't get a ton of catches compared to, say, a Kamara or Barkley, but he does get enough to have some kind of a floor there with the pass catching. So to me, when you're drafting Dalvin Cook, you're trying to draft a guy with a bell cow running back that doesn't have much competition behind him, and the Vikings have already shown us that they're willing to feature him, whereas that's a question mark for Miles Sanders. I love Miles Sanders, but there's legit question marks based on with Boston Scott there. They're rumored to still be bringing in a veteran, but trust me, I love the pass catching upside of Miles Sanders. He's one of my favorite guys, but I do think you have to agree that there's at least more uncertainty with his path to being a bell cow than there is with Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. But, my response to that was that, if the Eagles bring in Devonta Freeman or Shady McCoy, I've heard rumors of, to me, Alexander Madison is, a bigger threat to Dalvin Cook's touches than either of those guys would be to Miles Sanders. So I guess that's just kind of how I look at it. I think the best scenario possible for somebody who's high on Sanders like I am would be for them to sign one of these guys like McCoy and Freeman and just let his ADP tank and then just hit him even harder at a lower price point, because I would have absolutely no fear from those guys. I mean, Sanders from week 12 on had under 15 touches only once, over 21 touches in half those games, and he was targeted 5 or more times in every single one of those final 6 games. So I'm all about the Miles Sanders love this year.
So practically speaking, in drafts, obviously if you have, one of the top 4 picks, you're taking one of your running backs. If you are in picks, say 5 through 10 or 11, where, where Drake and Sanders aren't necessarily going, are you reaching there because you want to build your teams with a running back, or are you waiting to get them more at ADP and instead you're going to pivot to, say, a wide receiver there in the mid to late first round?
If I'm in one of those middle picks, maybe 5 to 7, I think chances are that I am going to, I won't be taking Thomas or Adams there or Hill. I am definitely going to be trying to build my team around these running backs who have that immense touch upside. I will probably, with those mid picks, be taking Derrick Henry or Dalvin Cook and then hoping I can land one of Drake or Sanders in round 2. At the end of round 1, if I'm in, that 10 to 12 range, I'm fine reaching on ADP to get one of those guys just because of the upside that I believe they have.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think as the season's going, or actually tell me right now, where are Kenyon Drake and Miles Sanders ADP at?
Kenyon Drake is the running back 10 going around pick 18.7, and Miles Sanders is the running back 13 at pick 25.4, so right around that 2-3 turn, although I will say that might be baking in some of the earlier drafts a little bit more because I have not seen Miles Sanders last to the 3rd round, I don't think once in the last couple weeks.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the industry draft that I did a few weeks ago on Drafters. Kenyon Drake went at pick 2-1, and Miles Sanders right after him at 2-2. I think that's probably closer to where they're going to end up settling. So if you're at the turn, you could theoretically get both of them. But if you're in that, say, pick 7 or 8, I think it's pretty unlikely one of those guys is going to fall to you in the 2nd round if kind of public sentiment continues on the trajectory it's at right now on those guys.
I agree with that completely. And the one guy we didn't really touch on, the last guy in this tier, if you will, is Austin Eckler. I would like to have him even higher than this. I think that there is just a legit concern. We talked about in our last video with quarterbacks, how much Phillip Rivers loves to dump off to these guys. And Eckler was just phenomenal last year before Melvin Gordon came back. And even after, really, just put up monster numbers as a receiving back. Do you think that the transition from Rivers to, Tyrod Taylor, or if it ends up being Herbert for the majority of the year, who's another athletic guy, is that going to erase what Austin Eckler is capable of doing in the passing game because those guys are going to be more likely to keep the ball and run it? Or, is the departure of Melvin Gordon sort of balance off that risk, I guess? And, how do you feel about Austin Eckler?
Yeah, this one's so tough for me because as just a player and a running back, I love watching Austin Eckler. And even the ways that they were using him last year. One, he was just sucking up all of those targets underneath, but they were also using him in really creative ways. They were sending him on those wheel routes or even just lining him up wide and letting him get matched up on a linebacker. They were doing that a couple times a game, and it really, helped expand his upside when you have that average depth of target that really starts to creep up. So I do think it's a concern with the transition between Taylor and Herbert. Taylor, who's a running quarterback, those guys don't traditionally check down as much. Then they also draft Joshua Kelly, which really brings into question, is Eckler going to be coming off the field inside the 5-yard line? Like, there's lots of question marks around Eckler's situation, but as a talent and as a player, I love him. He's going to be a tough cookie for me to crack based on how I generally draft, where I'm trying to get one of these bell cows. I'm probably not going to have a lot of Eckler in best ball because it's just a little too pricey for the uncertainty of his role for my liking.
Yeah, I completely understand that, and I think that you could project guys like Nick Chubb, guys like Joe Mixon to have bigger shares of their own team's work as running backs. The thing about it that really just swings it for me is that, this guy had 92 receptions last year. You can't project Nick Chubb for a third of that, or barely a third of that, So I just think that receiving upside in a full point PPR format like Drafters, I'm going for that upside, even if it comes down to little and he's in the 70 to 80 catch range. I still think that isn't going to burn you taking him this highly. He's my running back 9. He's the consensus RB 11 by ADP. So, right in that same range. I love him as an RB 2. And I think that we can move on here to this next group of guys looking at running backs 10 through 19. And this is where I start to get really different from ADP. And I'll just read them in order here. Joe Mixon, running back 10. Nick Chubb, 11. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 12. Josh Jacobs, 13. Todd Gurley, 14. David Johnson all the way up at 15. James Conner, 16. Melvin Gordon, 17. Aaron Jones all the way down at 18. And then Devin Singletary to close things off at 19. What stands out to you in this group of players?
So what stands out to me is probably Clyde Edwards-Helaire. What is his ADP right now?
ADP is running back 23. And again, overall ADP, the number that I have right now is 48.9, but I have not seen him go that late in a very long time. He almost always goes in the late second round from what I've been seeing in the drafts that I've been in. Maybe third round, depending if you've got a group of players who don't want to go after the rookies like that. But, ultimately, I think that his ADP is going to end closer to RB12 than RB23 when things are all said and done.
Yeah, I think that is definitely the trend we're going to see with him. I actually don't have a ton to complain about. The way you have it, Chubb and Jacobs, we know that they're going to have huge rushing loads. They're going to get goal line carries, but they are going to be game script dependent. We know Kareem Hunt and, Jalen Richard, and they bring in, Lynn Bowden. There's guys here that can really cap these guys' ceiling, and it's hard for drafters because we love these guys as rushers. They're fun to watch, but everything the team does is telling us, hey, these guys aren't going to be 3-down backs. And that's where it then gets interesting. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the ultimate Rorschach test as far as situation versus inherent talent. But it is really hard, again, in a best ball league where I'm really swinging for the fences, and say I don't like my pocket where I'm drafting a running back in round 1 and I'm having to go wide receiver, Clyde Edwards-Helaire to me is still that guy just because of the unknown in that offense in Mahomes that could really deliver massive weeks for you. So he's a guy that I'm probably going to be prioritizing a little bit more in best ball. And then I think you have a lot of these guys properly ranked as far as David Johnson, Melvin Gordon, James Conner, who are the presumptive lead backs on their teams. They're not the best offenses. They do have some competition, but if you squint, you could really see things breaking right and them being a bell cow back. And really, isn't that what we're trying to do in this range, is identify a bell cow back on the cheap?
Yeah, absolutely. And David Johnson is a guy who I'm very far ahead of consensus. I mean, he's my running back 15. He's going as the running back 26 in ADP. And look, I don't know what happened to him last year. It wasn't the scheme because Drake came in and produced high-end fantasy running back one numbers immediately when he got traded in week 9. And, going into last year, we would have said, what, Kenyon Drake is like half the player that David Johnson was. So maybe David Johnson is actually just washed up. I guess that is the fear that I have with ranking him this highly, but I just think the upside is too high to pass up. If he's just 75% of the player that he was when he was a top 3 fantasy back in Arizona, then I think that he could legitimately flirt with running back 1 numbers. And again, this is a scenario like we talked about at the top, that just because he's the running back 15, in my opinion, doesn't mean you need to take him there. You can get a guy like that later, closer to his ADP. Take him as a back-end running back too if he's going as running back 26. Make sure you get him at running back 23 or 24 off the board. So, yeah, I mean, David Johnson is somebody that I'm really going to be high on, and I'm going to end up with a lot of shares and just hope that he can bounce back in this Houston offense.
Yeah, I like the David Johnson call. And another kind of interesting example is, David Johnson was dealing with a lot of injuries last season. They were kind of shifting his role around. Is he a bell cow back? Is he a pass catcher? Blah, blah, blah. And now we're really discounting him. Granted, he's changed teams. But in a lot of ways, think about Alvin Kamara. He was a completely different player last year after he got hurt. He just did not have the same explosion and lateral agility, and he really looked like just a guy out there. And now we're all back comfortable ranking him at number 4, number 5, because we're trusting that he's back to normal. To me, there's kind of a weird thing going on with David Johnson where we're pricing him at his injury-riddled level and not at his full health. Another thing is, the Texans have been really stubborn with Duke Johnson. They do not want to give him an expanded role. So it's like, who's really going to challenge David Johnson? On top of that, they got publicly owned for the trades that they did, getting rid of DeAndre Hopkins, paying a lot to get David Johnson. There's going to be some element of saving face there, showing that this David Johnson acquisition was worth it. I think he's going to get all he can handle, and it's a good offense. I mean, when you have Deshaun Watson as your quarterback, and you have the pass-catching ability, I do think David Johnson could be one of the most undervalued guys in this range.
Yeah, not to mention all the targets that have vacated that offense with that DeAndre Hopkins trade, like you mentioned. Yeah, I'm sure Brandon Cooks will absorb some of that, but I think it'd be hard-pressed to find a more injury-prone wide receiver core that's, headed off by Brandon Cooks and Will Fuller. So, David Johnson's target share is something that I'm super interested in as well. The last guy that I really want to hit on in this tier is Aaron Jones. He's my running back 18. His ADP is all the way up at running back 8. And I think that is probably the most egregious ADP at running back right now. You're just banking on a guy who saw 36.2% of his fantasy points come from touchdowns. And to just put that number in perspective, you look at a guy like McCaffrey, only 24.2% of his points came from touchdowns. You look at a guy like Zeke, that number's right around 26%. So we know that touchdowns year to year are very unpredictable, and they added a second-round running back. Jamal Williams is going to be siphoning some of the receiving work, albeit probably not too much, but some nonetheless. So I am completely out on Aaron Jones this year. Do you think that's crazy? How do you feel about this ranking at running back 18?
No, I'm definitely more in line with your ranking than his current ADP. I think this is kind of a case of fantasy gamers ignoring new information and also ignoring some old information. I mean, Aaron Jones everyone agrees Aaron Jones is a great running back talent. He has the profile to succeed. But the Packers over and over said it does not matter. He is in a 50-50 timeshare with James, why am I blanking on his name
Jamal Williams.
Jamal Williams, sorry. Yeah, they were giving him equal work, and sometimes Jamal Williams was getting the better end of the work. He was getting a lot of the pass-catching stuff. Now, all of a sudden, they don't add any wide receivers in the draft. Which to me is signaling that they're not really wanting to go as up-tempo. They already draft their future replacement for Aaron Rodgers. They draft another tight end, which again signals to me that they're wanting to go more run-heavy, maybe more two tight end sets. And then on top of all of it, they draft A.J. Dillon, another big bruising running back that is there to steal goal line carries. And even though Aaron Jones is the most complete back, you could make an argument that Jamal Williams is the better pass catcher and A.J. Dillon is the better goal line back. And I just don't see any way that all three of these guys aren't involved. And kind of one of the things we've hammered over and over again is that we can deal with two-way running back committees. Like if it's just two guys, both of them can get theirs. We saw it with Austin Eckler and Melvin Gordon last year. But when you enter that third guy into the mix, all bets are off. And to me, this is kind of an all bets are off situation, and Aaron Jones is being egregiously overdrafted.
Yep. Could not agree more. Let's move on to our next group here, running backs 20 through 30. And this is kind of the final group of guys that you could really make an argument, I think, are going to be potential workhorses, bell cows for their teams, albeit a lot of them are going to be guaranteed to be splitting time. So my main question for you with this tier is, are you going to be more likely to draft somebody who is a role player with a guaranteed role, like Tariq Cohen or Kareem Hunt or somebody in that range, or guys with more built-in downside but higher ceiling, like Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift. So how do you feel about that when it comes to a tier like this?
Yeah, so I will just say in general as a tier, I have a prejudice and a bias against like this bucket of players, not the specific players, but this ADP range for running backs. Because one, like you said, we're entering way more question marks about what their role is. And on top of that, for me, there's a huge opportunity cost with what wide receivers are available. And I'm looking at my recent draft with drafters where I'm drafting guys like Tyler Boyd and Christian Kirk. I'm even bouncing over to get my first quarterback, Dak Prescott. And this is that range that the David Montgomery, Damian Williams, Mostert, these guys are going. And in a couple of rounds is when then I'm starting to look to hammer running backs in that zero running back build range for me. And to me, I look at these guys and I compare it to the wide receiver ADPs, and I just don't see how they have the same ceiling as those guys. So naturally and just reflexively, I don't like these running backs. But I think there is an interesting discussion in here as part of like what role are you going to prioritize? Are you going to take a Tariq Cohen who's going to have a decent pass catching floor but isn't going to see a lot of the rushing work, or are you going to take a big swing on DeAndre Swift and hope that, hey, the committee days in Detroit are long gone? This is kind of what I guess I would call the gambler's running back tier. Like, how much do you want to gamble in this range? Are these guys that you are excited to target, or is this just a necessity from roster construction for you?
It's tough because it comes down to kind of what you're saying. The wide receivers in that range are undeniably guys, I think, with just better median projections. They're guys that are going to outproduce a lot of these running backs when the season is over. But, position scarcity and stuff like that is going to make you want to take these running backs a little bit earlier. Ultimately, there's a lot of guys in this tier that I'm never going to be drafting. I'm almost never going to be taking guys like Leonard Fournette, Chris Carson, guys who I just don't envision having that ceiling really under any circumstances of being more than like a mid-range RB2. But there are some guys in this grouping of ADP that I really do like. For example, one guy that I really want to hit on is Kareem Hunt. I think that there are about maybe 20 NFL teams out there where if Kareem Hunt was on the roster, he would instantly be viewed as a top 10 fantasy running back. It was really off the field things that landed him in the spot where he is now behind Nick Chubb that, obviously severely limits him. But he is different to me from guys like, Tony Pollard, Chase Edmonds, guys like that who really only have value if the guy ahead of them goes down. We saw Kareem Hunt come in last year averaging 5.5 targets per game and a handful of touches as well. And if Nick Chubb goes down for any reason whatsoever, he's a top 5 running back, a top 3 running back instantly. So, guys like that, like Kareem Hunt, are guys that I will target in this range over and over again.
Yeah, and I think there's some interesting other dynamics there. Like if I'm looking at DeAndre Swift and Kerryon Johnson, I'm generally going to always want to go for the younger guy that the team has just recently invested in. If they're that close together, I do think ADP will end up pushing a much bigger gap in between two players like Swift and Kerryon, where Kerryon becomes more attractive as kind of, a leverage play on people overdrafting Swift. Although I'll flip the script there and say Damian Williams is interesting, right? Because in the same way that, people are going to overdraft Clyde Edwards-Helaire because we're all chasing that upside, and I think rightfully so, there are scenarios where maybe he does have a bad training camp. Maybe he's struggling with pass protection and they don't trust him and they want Damian Williams on the field. I mean, that's the kind of fragile situation I want to be capitalizing on with these picks. Again, though, for me, I think it's just a range where I'm not going to get any of these guys. I mean, we're kind of talking, like we said, round 6 through 8 here, and it's normally around 9 or 10 when I'm then looking to start looking at my next grouping of running backs. So I do think there are interesting guys in here, but they just generally aren't going to fill my roster construction needs.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And to the point you made about Damian Williams, I think that there's a couple of ways that situation could play out, especially, to sort of start the year. But, it's really going to be, is this going to be a Kamara Ingram situation where they're both extremely productive in their own ways? Or, is this going to be a Kamara Latavius Murray situation where, one of them, Damian Williams, only has value if Edwards-Helaire disappoints, or goes down. So I think that there is definitely enough room in this Chiefs offense for both of them to be productive. Obviously they've got Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce there, but what else is there? Mecole Hardman, who people want to take a step forward, but that's really an iffy proposition, I think. Sammy Watkins, who's had his chance and failed multiple times. So, I definitely think that there's a situation where this plays out where Damian Williams is productive, as well as Edwards-Helaire. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you as sort of maybe avoiding this ADP range for the most part. And speaking of an ADP range where we might have a little bit of, disagreement, I look at this next tier of guys as sort of the running back dead zone. There's a lot of players in this group that I want absolutely no exposure to. I think that they're guys with relatively middling floors and relatively low ceilings as well. The standout, I think, in terms of ADP here is Mark Ingram, who's my running back 34, but he has an ADP all the way up at running back 17. And I'm also considerably lower than ADP on his backfield cohort, J.K. Dobbins, who's my running back 40 all the way down. I'm sorry, I actually moved him up recently. He's my running back 37 now, going at an ADP of running back 30. So what do you think about this group from 31 to 40?
Yeah, so this is definitely a group in general in this ADP range that I am more excited about. And again, it's not even about specific players, but what you see in this range are a lot of backfields where it's like, let's take we just talked about the cohort that had Raheem Mostert, and then in this one we have Tevin Coleman. So these are backfields where the market is making an assumption about things based on, in my opinion, kind of limited information, basically how Mostert finished the season last year, specifically the playoffs. To me, these are the situations I'm trying to capitalize on in all drafts, but specifically best ball too, where the market is overconfident in how they think something's going to shake out. And if it goes a slightly different way, how can we profit? So passing on Mostert and drafting Tevin Coleman, those are the kind of leverage spots I'm looking for. And very similar with the Ronald Jones. I think your rankings for Vaughn and Jones are actually very fair and very realistic. Vaughn's going to be way overdrafted relative to your rankings. I'd rather just scoop Ronald Jones and bet on that backfield maybe being more of a split, or maybe the rookie isn't ready. So that's what I'm looking for in this range, is capitalizing on, I guess, market overconfidence.
I completely agree with you on that. And, the beauty of Tevin Coleman specifically is that you don't have to take him in this range. He's my running back 35, but his ADP is running back 45. So he's going a lot later than that. And I think you can get him, later than that typically. And I'm all about it. Tevin Coleman is somebody that I'm going to be targeting a lot. Matt Breida left to Miami, and he's taking 142 touches with him. That's damn near as many touches as Raheem Mostert's had over the last 2 seasons. You're like, yes, Mostert closed out last season very well, which gives him the clear edge over Coleman, but the price in ADP just doesn't reflect how I think that this is going to play out in terms of the way that they'll be splitting touches. So definitely Tevin Coleman, you can wait a little bit past this running back 30, mid-30 range to get him and still get that same upside that I think that people are going to be paying a lot more for in Raheem Mostert. How do you feel about the Mark Ingram ranking? I've got him significantly lower than ADP. And yeah, how do you feel about that?
It's interesting. Are you lower ADP on both Ravens running backs? Because I got to assume Dobbins is much higher than that too, right?
Yeah, I'm significantly lower. Ingram is my running back 34. He's the RB 17 in ADP, and I've got Dobbins all the way at running back 37, a couple spots behind Ingram, and his ADP is running back 30.
Right. So yeah, just based on your rankings, and I'm going to be the same way. I'm probably not going to own either of these guys. Maybe we could see a shift in season. Maybe the hype train for Dobbins gets so out of control that Mark Ingram becomes a really good value. But I again am kind of inclined to agree with your rankings here. Like if they did fall in this range to where your rankings were, and I was getting one of these guys in the 8th or 9th round, I would feel great about it. I think that it's a great running back target. But yeah, you're really paying a premium. And if I do think I would lean with Dobbins and just hoping that, that capital they invested in him and everything you heard the team saying was real and they're ready to feature him sooner than later. But again, that's just all hope, right? Like I hope that for Justice Hill last year too. Yep. And it didn't work out. So I think your rankings are realistic there. Here's a question for you. When you're doing your rankings, how are you thinking about median outcome and then also upside? I think like say your rankings of Tariq Cohen and J.K. Dobbins are maybe good examples of this, of like Tariq Cohen is probably very likely to finish around where you ranked him, and J.K. Dobbins is probably very likely to finish either way below or way ahead of where you ranked him. So like when you are thinking about these handcuff backs or these guys with big upside but not immediate paths to production, how does that factor into your rankings?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to definitely be a case-to-case basis, and it also is going to be a roster construction question. So if I am looking at, taking one of these guys as my running back 5, I think I'm going to go on the guy with upside because, if I'm taking one of these guys with a relatively low ceiling but a safe floor as a later guy, I've already got a bunch of running backs on my roster. I need them to hit at a higher, have a higher ceiling, I guess, to, jump some of those guys that I took ahead of them and make it into my lineup at a frequent rate. If I'm going to be drafting a bunch of wide receivers and tight ends and I take a quarterback early and then I'm really weak and thin at my running back position, yeah, I might take Tariq Cohen to sort of balance that out. But yeah, it's just, specifically in the case that we're talking about right now with J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram, it goes back to what you were saying with Aaron Jones, and when it's a backfield that's split 3 ways, it just gets really complicated. And I'm not calling Lamar Jackson a running back by any stretch. That would be disrespectful, but he is going to be taking a significant amount of carries. There's no denying that. And I think that that's going to be the case for as long as, any running back is in Baltimore, unless we see something dramatic shift. So I think it just really reduces the ceiling on all of these guys. And we saw that with Mark Ingram last year. He was productive, but he had 20 touches in a single game only twice last year. So all of these guys are just going to eat off of each other, and it's going to be a situation to avoid, in my opinion.
Yeah. 2 guys that are interesting to me that I would have in this tier, and this is kind of bleeding into our next tier, but I would personally have Breida and Jordan Howard flipped, and I also would have Zach Moss pushed up a little higher. Give me your case for Howard over Breida, knowing that you're talking about a man who has put the Miami Dolphins backfield under a microscope for many, many months.
Yeah. So the thing with that is that I think that Jordan Howard is somewhat underrated. I get that he's not a flashy guy, especially in terms of what he can do as a pass catcher, which is essentially nothing. And that's definitely going to hurt his value in full PPR formats like Drafters is. But, Matt Breida to me is one of the more injury-prone guys. I try not to be too heavy on that when I rank guys like that, because I think that it is kind of not random, but I just don't want to project certain guys to get injured more often than I project others. But with Matt Breida, I do think that you can make that case that his, expected game plays is going to be significantly lower than a lot of these other guys in the range. So that's really what it comes down to. If you could tell me that Matt Breida and Jordan Howard are going to have the same amount of carries this year, then yeah, I would definitely put Matt Breida ahead of Jordan Howard, probably a little bit, in a significant way, but I don't believe that. So I do have to incorporate that into the way that I rank Matt Breida. And similarly, Breida's my RB46. You'll see a guy like Darius Geis is my RB45. That's going to be a trend with these guys. If I'm not expecting them to not be healthy for the full season, I'm going to knock them down a couple of spots.
Yeah, and that makes sense. To me, Breida offers kind of the really big swing for the fences, high upside pick, partly too of just how he is as a player. I mean, he's been one of the fastest guys on tape in the league, the next gen stats, and he has just always shown a propensity for ripping off big plays. Obviously, the health is a concern, but I think we've seen it over the years with some players where it's like these guys are injury prone until they're not. And you're not paying a premium for Matt Breida in this range. I mean, I did draft him in the Drafters Industry League. I took him in round 9, and to me the risk reward proposition is pretty good there, whereas I feel like people are taking a similar kind of risk reward on, say, Devin Singletary in the 5th, or even I'm trying to look at some other names here, a Marlon Mack who's going ahead of him. I just feel like those kind of question marks surround all of these running backs. And so then I'm just looking at the cheapest ones after that, and Breida kind of checks those boxes for me. And just because I do think he'll obviously lose goal line work to Jordan Howard, and Jordan Howard is underrated. He's been a great long veteran running back in the league, but I think Breida has the juice, and as evidenced by them willing to give up a draft pick to get him, I think he'll be involved, and I think he has the potential to really outproduce that draft slot.
That is definitely possible. Another thing to consider with Breida is that he's going to have some of his receiving work siphoned off by your boy Patrick Laird. Another argument against Breida, and this is more based on the guys surrounding him, is how many times is Matt Breida going to ever have the upside to finish the season as an RB1? Probably never. And you look at guys who are going, even after him in these drafts, like Tony Pollard, like Alexander Madison, like Chase Edmonds. Like, yeah, these are guys who, their roles are going to be questionable, if not very weak on a week-to-week basis. But if something happens, I mean, we know injuries are going to happen throughout the season. I think that I would just rather target one of those guys as my running back 5 in this range, and hope that I get lucky and luck box into a stretch of running back 1 production from a guy like Pollard or from a guy like Chase Edmonds.
Yeah, and one other thing I would maybe push back on about the Breida is, again, part of the beauty of best ball is he would be a tricky start in season long, because there's going to be some variability, but I think most people would agree, like, he's going to have some explosive plays in some big weeks. In best ball, we don't have to worry about when we're banking on those. We just know we're going to get those points when they come. So he is attractive to me, even specifically as a best ball pick versus, in your season-long leagues where it can be trickier.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And then 3 guys that I want to hit on here sort of at the end of my rankings are Darrell Henderson, Antonio Gibson, and Nyheim Hines. Are you interested in any of these guys? Nyheim Hines, there's been talk about him getting targets. There were some Frank Reich quotes out of Indianapolis that have, put him on the radar, I think. And we don't know. I mean, Phillip Rivers has definitely shown a propensity to be dumping off to those guys. I don't think that we think Jonathan Taylor is going to be that guy. Maybe Marlon Mack will be that guy. He should have the skill set, but they've just never used him that way. So do you think Nyheim Hines is going to have more value with Phillip Rivers at quarterback than he did with Jacoby Brissett?
Yeah, I'm interested in all 3 of these guys for various reasons. I mean, everything is like graded on a scale to me, and when we're getting this deep into ADP and ranks, like, these guys all become more attractive to me because of the price, and because I can tell myself a story about why they could be fantasy relevant. I think the Nyheim Hines thing is just the Phillip Rivers effect. I mean, we saw the quotes the other day. The Colts still want to use Nyheim Hines. Sure, it is tricky. They invested heavily in Jonathan Taylor. They have Marlon Mack. But if Nyheim Hines maintains that third down, up-tempo, pass-catching role with Phillip Rivers, like, he could easily average 4 or 5 catches a game, which is, if you're drafting super fragile constructions like I am, where I'm taking one running back early and then a bunch late, like, he's the guy that gives me a high floor while I'm waiting for a potential Pollard or Madison or Edmonds to hit. So I like Hines there. To me, Darrell Henderson is similar to kind of a Ronald Jones, where let's just buy the dip. Everyone's confident in Cam Akers being the guy. He probably is going to be the guy. But if he isn't, or if it's a 50-50 split, Darrell Henderson's going to really pay off at that price. And then Antonio Gibson is interesting to me too. He wasn't on my radar a ton from a redraft perspective, and then I saw John Paulson at 4 for 4 was pretty aggressive in his rankings. And when you consider kind of the injury stuff going on with Geis and Bryce Love, in the ways Gibson might be used creatively, I think there's potential for him to really outproduced his draft slot. And we talked earlier about how we want to target some of these rookies, but at palatable prices. We're going to get priced off of guys like Keyshawn Vaughn and Akers and Dobbins and Swift. Yep. But Antonio Gibson is going to be a guy that's going to be at a palatable price, and that's the kind of rookie I want to be investing in at that cost.
Absolutely love Gibson. Is there anybody who I don't have in this top 50 that you want to mention before we get out of here?
I'm looking at some of my recent drafts. One backfield I'm taking some cracks on late is the Pittsburgh backfield. Mm-hmm. I think Benny Snell and Anthony McFarland are kind of interesting. Again, from the market is pretty confident that James Conner is going to be the guy. But we saw last year that they were willing to go to a Jalen Samuels, go to a Benny Snell, and now they add McFarland. So those are guys that I'm a little bit interested in here. Raquel Armstead as kind of a pure handcuff to Leonard Fournette, when we know how disgruntled Fournette is right now. He's coming off an offseason where he hasn't been happy either. And Armstead's really the only guy there. I know they brought in Chris Thompson, but I think Armstead has a pretty good path to production if Fournette went down. So he's another guy I'd toss in there. And then maybe one other rookie as both a handcuff and a guy who could have some immediate production is Darrington Evans. Behind Derrick Henry. He's a little interesting to me if he has, say, the Dion Lewis role plus handcuff upside. So those might be some other guys that are sneaking in there for me. And, yeah, maybe even another rookie, A.J. Dillon, would be a guy I'd take a look at there late. But otherwise, I like your ranks.
Yeah, definitely. The one guy who didn't make it in here that I do like quite a bit, I find myself taking late, is Joshua Kelly for the Chargers. I know that I'm high on Austin Eckler, but somebody's going to be splitting those touches with him, and I don't think it's going to be Justin Jackson. I think Jackson's probably just a guy at this point, and I would just swing on it being Joshua Kelly at that point, because you can get him extremely late.
Yeah, it's now's the fun time of year to be a zero RB drafter, because you could really talk yourself into a lot of these guys. What happens as the season goes along is we get more information about how these backfields are going to shake out, and the prices for the premier handcuffs and kind of second tier running backs becomes much more expensive. So I'll tell you this, if you think you have an edge, if you think you're on top of the market right now is the time to get in drafts, because you can get some really good deals on these guys, and the market is going to get much, much more efficient over the summer. So get in while the getting's good.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. And I think that is all we've got for today's episode on running backs. We've got 2 more of these coming. We'll do wide receivers and tight ends in the coming days. So make sure, if you haven't already, you hit that subscribe button, drop a like, leave a comment if you have any feedback, and give us a follow on Twitter. You can find Peter at Peter Overzet. You can find me at Ben Hauver. And thank you for watching. Thank you, Peter, for joining me, and we will talk to you all again very soon.
Deuces.